A while back, I planned on making a video on the Portopia serial murder case because I wanted to touch a bit on the game's importance and specifically highlight how much of a disgrace the remake was to video games as a medium and life as we know it. But then I just sorta dropped it. Not just because it didn't feel right to be so overly negative on something people already stopped caring about, but also because I only thought the original Portopia was okay. And it's not a game devoid of discussion, so it eventually became a video I didn't feel like I wanted or needed to make. Especially since I never felt like I could truly wrap my head around what Portopia was accomplishing. I knew there was a key piece of the puzzle that is Yuji Horí's influence on video games as a whole that eluded me for years. That is, until it didn't. The year was 1983, and during this time, the Japanese PC gaming market was starting to gain some footing, with RPGs and adventure games making names for themselves. And it was during this time when Yuji Horii got into the gaming industry. His first official project under Enix Corporation took heavy inspiration from the text-based adventure game Deadline, an American-developed game centering around a detective murder mystery. And from that he came up with Portopia Serial Murder Case, which was a relative success within the Japanese PC gaming community. So what, with like 12 people? Actually, let's take a moment to highlight this game's greater genre at the time, because it seemed like everywhere you looked there were adventure games popping up from budding developers. But not everyone could really get behind these games and their text parser input system. The adventure game genre itself is named as such due to taking its structure from Colossal Cave Adventure, a game that saw players exploring a world entirely without graphics, sound, or controls, as you typed in the actions you wanted to take in order to explore the world of the game. Even though by the time 1983 rolled around, graphics became more or less standard, and the original Portopia and other adventure games and RPGs had quick keys to make commands easier, the very clear monotonous core of the game design still remained. In just about every computer game of this time, you had to type out everything. And to an extent, I get it. Hell, I'd even say it was great for the time as a way to get people accustomed to typing on keyboards. Something so natural to anyone today was a completely foreign concept 40 years ago. But even back then, there were clear flaws in this system. Because if you don't type out the exact verbs or phrases the computer game is programmed to recognize, then you're basically saying nothing at all. It becomes this ridiculous game of having to say an exact sentence to a T. It's so easy to give up, not because you're lost in the game, but because you're lost, trying to get lost in the game. And this problem is only compounded when introducing this system to a language that has a dozen different ways of saying I. But don't take my word for it, take Yuji Horí's, because in an interview with Beat Magazine, he had this to say. I played a lot of adventure games myself, but the truth is, I've never cleared a single one. There'd be some item in the game right in front of me, and I'd try to pick it up, but the computer would respond with, I don't understand that, or why don't you try something else? And I'd just end up frustrated, like what the hell? So when it came time for Yuji Horí's next adventure game, he said, why not just cut out the middleman? Released in 1984 in a partnership with Login Soft, Hokkaido Serial Murder Case, The Ughook's Disappearance, eliminated the text parser input style completely in favor of a clear selection of predetermined commands, all lined out in one menu, all as easily accessible as a single button press away. The meat of the game design is laid as bare as possible in front of the player, as you now know everything you could possibly need to input in order to progress through the game. In other words, he created a menu. And when you put it that way, it sounds so simple. And well, that's exactly what worked about it. In the book, Japanese Role-Playing Games, Genre, Representation, and Liminality in the JRPG, Yusuke Koyama highlighted this system when saying, it was adventure games that preceded RPGs in the shift to easiness. Command selection was adopted for the user interface. Until then, adventure games required players to enter commands as words, and part of the goal of the game was to find the words. After the introduction of command inputs, the player could simply choose their next action from a list of available commands in that situation, and the gameplay became more about enjoying the story. And then they go on to say, Hokkaido was the very first game to utilize this system. But wait, is that even true? Well, the answer to that is a bit complicated. So a bit of background info for the video you're watching. This was initially envisioned as a video essay for a class. However, you guys are getting the extended cut, where I want to delve into more things that I couldn't fit in a strict 6-minute time frame. And well, this is something that stuck in the back of my mind. I want to make 100% sure if this is the game that actually invented the command selection system, because it wasn't entirely clear. Most mainstream sources just credit Portopia for the Famicom version's use of the command system, when it's very clear it took the system from Hokkaido. Sure, that game still gets credit for being the first adventure game on the Famicom, thus using a D-pad control scheme instead of pressing individual keys on a keyboard, but to say it's responsible for the command system is far from true, considering Hokkaido is literally right there. But if people are so quick to say one is the originator instead of the other, who's to say the other actually is? Then again, I did sort of come to the same conclusion anyway. So let me explain. Looking around, I have found games before the release of Hokkaido Serial Murders on December 21st, 1984, that use a command system. Thanks to OFM7.com, those being Joshirio Panic, Atami Onsen Adventure, the Legend of Star Arthur series, and Tridental. But problems arose when I went to play these games myself. You might think, well, no shit, Luke, you're illiterate. But you see, the footage you're watching for Hokkaido was captured by myself, and I was able to actually get through a bit of the game. I couldn't do that with the other games, because even though some of these games have command menus or simplified commands, they don't have everything that makes Hokkaido's work so well. The menus present in Hokkaido Serial Murders is always on screen, is never accompanied by a text parser whatsoever, and is aligned perfectly with a set of keys that are next to each other, in this case, the number row. No other game checked all these boxes. Some still rely on text parsers, some don't always have the menu present, and some have only quick keys strewn about the keyboard, something I mentioned has already been in RPGs. I will say, however, that I am sort of leaving this study incomplete, not only because I couldn't find ROMs of Tridental and Atami Onsen Adventure, and also I can't read any of these games anyway, but also because the supposed earliest game to have used commands, known as Spy 007 or 00.7, is only available as magazine code. I think the absolute closest you could get to a credible predecessor is the RPG Questron, which, as mentioned in this article, might be the game that directly influenced Hokkaido Serial Murders to have a command menu. But I wouldn't know, because when I played the game it went down like this. For once, it's not me it's illiterate, it's the computer. Maybe I should talk to my Apple II friend about getting their machine actually working. Anyways, if you want a definitive answer to what game invented the command menu as we know it, you could technically credit Hokkaido Serial Murders, but it would be disingenuous to say it came up with the concept. But regardless of all of this, what makes Hokkaido Serial Murders' use of the command system specifically so important isn't just its sole existence as is, but also the greater context it exists within. It is undeniable this had direct influence over Yuji Horí's magnum opus, Dragon Quest, which is considered one of the most influential RPGs of all time, because it made them easier to understand to a wider audience. Another thing mentioned in Koyama's writing, in their section solely dedicated to Dragon Quest, the overwhelming success of the Dragon Quest series made the 2D field of view and command-driven battle system the de facto standard for RPG game mechanics in Japan. And while that real-time overworld movement came from Ultima, the interactive command-driven system came directly from Hokkaido Serial Murders. And taking that into consideration, Hokkaido's greater influence on the video game industry is literally incomprehensible. Like, let's just go over a brief list of games that are either directly inspired by Dragon Quest or use Dragon Quest style menus. Final Fantasy, Mother, Megami Tensei, Phantasy Star, The Shining series, Fire Emblem, Pokemon, Mario RPGs, Moon, Undertale. And hey, you want games directly inspired by Hokkaido? How about the entire genre of Japanese adventure games after its release, including contemporary hits like Hideo Kojima's Snatcher and Nintendo Research and Development Team 1's Famicom Detective Club? How about having influence on game designers like, Eiji Aonuma, director and producer of the entire 3D Zelda lineage? Not a single one of these games would exist without Hokkaido serial murders, or the games Yuji Horii would develop based entirely around what he learned from Hokkaido serial murders. And with that said, I hope this at least puts into perspective why it's such a crime you can't play this game because it's only in Japanese! Well, these two aren't technically the same game. I mean, I guess they mostly are, but it's a bit complicated. I guess now's a good time to go over the various versions of Hokkaido serial murders, or Hokkaido Renza Satsujin Okoku ni Kyu, as it's originally known in Japan. Also, for time's sake, I'll usually be referring to the game as just Hokkaido, and I'll try to make sure you know when I'm distinctly talking about either Hokkaido the game or Hokkaido the region, so that you're not confused, but I can't make any promises. Anyway, what I've been showing you so far comes from the PC-88 version, one of the first versions released next to the PC-6001 version. Unfortunately, there aren't any ROMs with that version online, so I can't show you too much of it, but it's basically the same as the PC-88 version with worse graphics. However, I do want to mention, because it is exactly comparable to the 88 version content-wise, it is extremely impressive for the hardware. But as mentioned briefly before, the game was developed by Login Soft. While Yuji Horii wrote the script and came up with the game's design, it was them who brought the game to life, so that Horii could make another game by himself for Enix. Hokkaido was Login Soft's debut game, having very few people on the project, with Gozo Shiozaki acting as producer, while Toshiyuki Ueno was the sole programmer. They brought in Jun Suemi, who later became known for their art in the Wizardry series, to do the cover art, and this cover art was also used for every other PC version, and yes, I am going to throw it around on screen a million more times. And Akira Murai did the art for the PC-88 version. And as for Login Soft itself, Login Soft was directly associated with Login Magazine and owned by the ASCII Corporation, who also published the game. I know a lot of you might not be familiar with Login, but they were basically one of the first video game-focused magazine publications in Japan, and in later years, their column on the Famicom would later split off to become Famitsu, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The development of this game is actually pretty interesting. As mentioned before, Yuji Horii was working on 2 projects at the time, both of which he told Login about in an interview after Portopia was such a huge success. It was Gozo Shiozaki who actually came up with the idea to form Login Soft to help Yuji Horii make one of his games. As a part of this partnership, one of the first things they did for the game was take a business trip to the Hokkaido prefecture for research. Mostly because video games had never warranted such a dedicated level of research before, so by doing so they were definitely breaking new ground. But I'm sure a company-approved vacation wasn't such a bad idea either. Also, apparently Login Soft did even more business trips for games they planned to make, but these games, planned to be set in Hong Kong and Russia, were eventually cancelled. This is further detailed in the book 1980X Famicom Rhapsody, written by Gozo Shiozaki himself, which unfortunately is only in Japanese, but there are excerpts from the book online which you can find and translate, which I highly recommend reading through yourself, as they are very detailed and very interesting. They would later port the game to other computers like the FM7, the MSX, and the PC-98, but just like its predecessor, it was the Famicom version that became the most famous, but for more reasons than just its nature of being on the platform. This version of the game was handled by Pax Softnica, being their first adventure game for the Famicom, something they'd become known for in later years. Login Soft, however, still had influence over this game. While they didn't develop this version, they had the graphics redone by their own artist, Kiyokazu Arai. And this look for the game has become somewhat iconic. If you know about Hokkaido serial murders, this art style probably comes to mind. Like, no shade towards the original game's art direction, it was clearly going for a more realistic art style, and I think it looks great, especially for 1984, and considering the previous game looked like this. But making the switch to a more cartoony style gives the game a lot more character. Even aside from that, there are tons of major differences in this version. For example, the music. Yeah, the PC versions of Hokkaido don't have any music. This version does, and it's all great. It was almost entirely composed by Toshiyuki Ueno because I guess that guy can do anything. With the exception of 2 songs written by Akihiko Yabu and Gozo Shiozaki. One of which was the crime scene theme. That's really hard to say. And the other is for the hospital scene. This version is also known for having tons of structural changes, one of which being access to locations. In the original, you could go to any place that you had previously visited, while in the Famicom version, you're more limited depending on what point in the story you're at. Along with a few different puzzles that I'll dive into later, the biggest difference to this game is the entire third act. Yeah, this is something I think should be especially highlighted. These 2 versions of the same game have completely different endings where events, victims, and culprits aren't the same between the 2. Like, some things are similar enough on the surface. Wait, is that? But yeah, this is just really weird to me because I didn't really hear anything about it before diving into the game to make this video, even though, in my opinion, it's kind of a big deal. It's really odd to me that something like this happened at all, especially considering there are 2 other entire remakes of this game to talk about. Now, before you say, wait, wasn't there already a PC 98 version? That was just a port of the original release in 1985, when 16-bit computers were too expensive for a mass consumer market to warrant playing games on, thus too niche to warrant taking advantage of the hardware. This remake came out in 1992, when 16-bit was fucking everywhere. You better get with the times, Grandpa. And get with the times Hokkaido serial murders did, because this really takes advantage of the hardware, and interestingly enough, is based on the Famicom version, and not the PC 88 version, meaning this is a full remake for the platform. And even more interestingly, doesn't have Kiyokazu Arai as the artist, so this game uses a new, unique art style. And holy shit, it is gorgeous! If there's a Japanese version of the game you want to play as a non-Japanese speaker, well, I would highly consider this version, but unfortunately, there's one huge drawback. There's only 1 song. Yeah, 1 song for the entire game. Oh, sorry, actually, there's also unique music for the start and the ending, because fuck you. I don't know, if you do decide to play this version, try putting on the arranged soundtrack. Maybe that'll trick yourself into thinking it's part of the game. But hang on, let's backtrack a bit. If you do want to play Hokkaido in English, what options do you even have? Oh wait, fuck, I forgot to talk about the mobile ports. Well, there's nothing to talk about, they're lost and unpreserved. Well, I guess they could come back if someone like digs out a phone that has this game, or if they are legitimately released, because that could happen. Or I guess not, since they just put out the this doesn't make any sense. Let's talk about Gmode already. Now, unless you're really into Burger Time, or are a very specific type of Megami Tensei fan, I'm going to assume you have no idea who Gmode is. And I'm gonna say, you really should know them, because they're out here doing God's work in the modern video game industry. They've been around for a while as the main company that owns Data East's games after they shut down in 2003, but their true claim to fame was as a mobile developer. As in, these guys made games for flip phones. But that was the 2000s, and the last I checked, it is currently a current year. So let me ask you, if you became dedicated to a platform that slowly but surely lost relevance in coming decades, would you jump ship? Or would you go down and be forgotten forever? Well, Gmode chose the former, as recently they've been porting over their games to PC and the Switch under the Gmode Archives brand. That may not sound too exciting, but they are making previously inaccessible games from irrelevant hardware and services widely available to modern audiences, something not a lot of other companies are doing, or will ever do. And these games are also available to an international market, since Steam and the Nintendo Switch are region for. Since Steam is region free. But here's the best part. Gmode didn't stop with their own games. They've been reaching out to all their old competitors and re-releasing their games under the Gmode Archives Plus label. They got Japanese classics like Sorcerian and a series that I may or may not have plans to talk about more in the future. They have series that have fully made names for themselves on mobile, like the Tante Kibukawa Ryosuke series, spin-offs of major series like Armored Core, Harvest Moon, and as mentioned before, Megami Tensei. That includes multiple games based off stuff like the original SMT, Majin Tensei, Last Bible, old and new Persona. Gmode is more than just an old mobile developer. They are a shining example of industry-backed preservation, as they're pulling games from the depths of obscurity to be widely available. Just not in English. Of course, I guess that is natural, as Gmode themselves have never had an English presence. But regardless, their place in the modern gaming industry is one that should be highlighted. And that only rings more true with what they announced on February 21st, 2024. And I know it was a big deal because everyone was telling me to watch the Japanese run of the Nintendo Direct Mini Partner Showcase before I even thought to do so myself. Yeah, while you freaks rush to watch Japanese people play a game you can also play, you skipped right over the announcement of a full remake of Hokkaido Serial Murders, published by Gmode, developed by Room 6 and Game Studio. Yes, that actually is their fucking name, and set to release later that year. Right away from the trailer, it was made apparent that it'd be a remake of the Famicom version, being the original story still stuck on all PCs. But to make up for it, Yuji Horii himself was returning to write a brand new expanded epilogue for the game. At some point along the way, they announced the remake would come with the Famicom version on Switch, and that the remake would be getting a full English text translation, now officially titled The Hokkaido Serial Murder Case, The Alcoholics Disappearance, Memories of Ice Tearful Figurine. Jesus fucking Christ. They're willing to give Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner Raido Kuzunoa vs. the Soulless Army a run for their money? Well, at least it isn't. Anyway, right before the game came out, Kozo Shizaki released that book I was talking about earlier, and Gmode featured all the excerpts about Hokkaido Serial Murders. I'm sorry, the Hokkaido Serial Murder Case, I'm not gonna say it. On their website, so that's how you're able to read them. And when it finally released on, admittedly, a really funny date,
There's nothing.
Thank you, son.
I have heard extremely little fanfare for this game. It seemingly sold well in Japan, but discussion of this game in the West has been radio silent, which can definitely be attributed to the complete lack of marketing the game got. There hasn't been a single English trailer released for the game, not a single article, review, or any piece of coverage from a major gaming news website. It doesn't even have enough reviews to get a Metacritic score. The only websites that have covered this game only do so tangentially, aren't as big as the websites I mentioned before, or are Games Radar Plus, who share damningly false information in the first paragraph and don't particularly care to properly emphasize the game. And I don't know, I think this is just a bit ridiculous considering Yuji Horii himself was all over the news because the Dragon Quest III remake was coming out in just a few months and getting tons of coverage. And as established before, Dragon Quest literally would not exist if it wasn't for Hokkaido serial murders. So this is going to be a bit of a tangent, I apologize, but I need to talk about this. When I started this channel, I did not expect the majority of my videos to be about Japanese adventure games. But ultimately, I think it was natural, because time and time again, it's been proven to me that Japanese adventure games, or the ADB genre, or whatever you want to call it, is one of the least recognized and least respected genres in the entire video game industry. And this whole situation is proof. You know what else is proof? The fact that when I said whatever you want to call it, your mind jumped to calling them visual novels. This disrespect goes both ways, by the way. From the industry, it's kind of ridiculous to me that they just straight up didn't even try to bring this genre to the West back in the day, despite the fact adventure games had a sizable niche here. Remember, Yuji Horii and other developers at the time were inspired by America to make adventure games, and they developed into what's essentially the same thing. LucasArts' SCUM engine and interface is just another version of a command menu. And despite all this, there's only like 2 properly localized games? What the hell's up with that? Like, sure, there's a huge amount of work that goes into localization and stuff, but it clearly wasn't an impossibility. The industry's ignorance has created and has only perpetuated this barrier between the Japanese adventure game genre with its cousins in the West, and the fans who would have loved them. As for Hokkaido's current release, I'm obviously aware Gmode doesn't have the money to pay off big news sites to get media coverage like Square Enix does, so I can't blame them too much. But then again, it is hard to ignore the fact that the game itself is partially owned by giant media conglomerate Kadokawa, and what, they can't afford to let this game have literally anything in the West? Well, of course they can, but why bother with the dense gaming community that doesn't even know this game exists? One which hasn't been eager to change the status quo. While I'll admit it's a bit hard to become informed on a bunch of games that require reading a different language, the refusal to try to be informed while still making judgments on a topic anyway is just as harmful to the genre's reputation as anything. I guess that is just the US in a nutshell, but still. This is how we get people mislabeling an entire genre as its own subgenre and making claims about one that really only apply to the other. This is how we get one of the most significant releases by Nintendo in the Switch era being met with whining and complaining by idiotic fake fans. This is how we get mountains of the stupidest, most annoying indie games ever trying to rewrite the history and cultural impact of the genres they claim to be a part of by being a joke. Listen, I'm not asking everyone on the internet to become me, specifically. But remember, bringing all this back to Hokkaido serial murders, people did flock to the Nintendo Direct that announced this game. But they did it because it had a trailer for a game you can already play. You're all fake. You sicken me with how little you truly care about real history, real progress, real innovation. And listen, I'm not bashing Mother 3 either. That is one of my favorite games ever. Do you think it got there because I whined out for Nintendo to hand it over for me? No, I love it because I already can play it and I already did. And ultimately, that is the solution we have for today's current problem. Because you can go buy the game that is currently available on the Nintendo Switch and Steam right now and play it. What, is it too expensive for you? This is priced as a premium game because that's what it is. So either pay up or be a broke little bitch. Okay, I will admit, it is a bit overpriced for what is ultimately a 40-year-old game. And even lowering it to around $30 would make it look more ideal. That's not even considering trying to get a physical version. Jesus Christ. Still more worth it than Tears of the Kingdom. Well, I guess it's up to me to let you know a bit better whether or not it actually is worth all that. For the rest of this video, I will decidedly not be talking about the game in full, but will instead give the game a more formal review, as obviously the internet is extremely lacking in something even as simple as that. And if I want you to play the game, the last thing I should be telling you is what happens, and the first thing I should be telling you is how it happens. So without further ado, here is the Hokkaido serial murder case, the Ukhusk disappearance, Memories of Ice, tearful figurine. I'm gonna keep calling it Hokkaido serial murders because fuck you. As I've already explained in length, Hokkaido serial murders utilizes the command selection system for its gameplay structure. So let's explain that further in length. These options rarely ever change outside of specific contexts, like during one-on-one interviews or special events. This menu is your entire gameplay experience, your entire arsenal to take on the case at hand, and at first, it might seem limiting, or even a bit odd. But trust me when I say there's a reason this became the basis for 2 entire genres. The command system present in Hokkaido serial murders not only makes way for a streamlined narrative experience, but it does so in a way that directly intertwines gameplay, writing, and presentation. You're using these commands to both solve the case and familiarize yourself with the world. And of course there's no better way to do that than with an innovation brought over from Portopia, your contextual anchor to the game, the assistant character. Yuji Horii was always fascinated by the idea of talking to a computer or a game and having it meaningfully respond to you. And this manifested in Portopia as Yasu. When you're inputting commands, you're not giving them to the game or just a computer, you're giving them to your assistant. In response, the game doesn't give you a cold, matter-of-fact answer. Your assistant addresses you directly. You're the boss. And while this is your case to solve, you have someone there to help you, someone there to understand and get to know, someone you may need to argue with or contest with, someone who may feel like a friend. In Hokkaido, this basically works the exact same way. You select a command, and your assistant, Shun, says something along the lines of, I don't know why he says that. I think that's just a thing that he does. Keeping this in mind, there's quite a few degrees of separation between your interactions and the world of the game. You have all the pieces to the puzzle, but it's almost like you're feeling for their places blindly. You need to figure out exactly what will fit when and where, but if there is a correct path or objective to follow, what does that leave the rest of the commands for? Just waiting to be used at the correct time? Of course not. Your investigation will take you all around the Hokkaido region, through multiple iconic cities and locations the region has to offer. Beyond the mystery you investigate, you are in a world that is moving and changing around you, and the game is able to sell you on this idea. If you go to a location, sure, you could just do what you need to do and move on, but there's always more to learn and take in. You can order Shun to look around and he may point out landmarks, tourists, and passerby. If you ask him to, he'll ask these people about certain things, and you might find something interesting, or maybe they'll just be regular people with no importance. Maybe Shun will give a fact about the area you're in, or he'll discover things himself depending on where you point him to. These sorts of small interactions will happen anywhere and everywhere you visit. If you've been to these places, I'm sure you could marvel at the game's accuracy in its look and feel, but for those unfamiliar, it's almost like you're getting a tour of the Hokkaido region. This is the world of Hokkaido serial murders. It is one you can look around in, hear and feel, and navigate through at your own pace. Often throughout the game, there will be times when you need to gather information from a bunch of different places before being able to progress, once a new piece of evidence or information presents itself. In a way, every piece of information you get can somewhat inform you on how to go about your case. Like when trying to look for a specific character, maybe you can trace their path depending on what you know about them. Or maybe you can go to a less explored place to see if you've missed anything. Whether or not you're progressing, you are taking in the world around you and seeing how or if it changes. If you're worried about getting stuck, in the modern version you're probably not going to run into too many problems, especially since the game has its own hint system.
The blackjack minigame.
Fuck,
Let's go gambling.
I'm going all in.
Stop the drum.
Sometimes you'll be able to return to the train station to ask Shun to play blackjack with you. Once you win a match, he'll bring up a hint as to what to do next. Through this minigame, even if you're bad at the game or don't really have a grasp on the system, you'll be able to make it through just fine. I mean, you can't be that bad at blackjack, right? I've heard some people say this is required for progression, but this isn't true. You don't ever need to play this game in any version that it appears in. It's just an optional feature. However, I could definitely argue it fits into the world and how the game wants you to play it. As our heroes take a short break and are able to come back into the case and see things from a new perspective, gaining the clairvoyance they need to continue on, perhaps, ever so subtly, they are conditioning you to do the same. If you are ever feeling stuck, like maybe you're at a point where you can't access the minigame, because yes, that can happen, you should also try taking a short break. Perhaps by coming back with a clear conscience, looking through notes, whether they be the in-game notes or your own pen and paper, you'll be able to progress through the game just fine. I only put emphasis on this advice because, well, this used to be the required way to play. Yeah, that's right, we're not done talking about version differences. In the Famicom version, once you got to a certain point, you will not be able to progress unless you quit the game and load back in with the provided password. I'm sure if this was in the modern version, it would automatically trigger a negative response from anyone trying to play the game, and you might even be happy hearing this knowing you don't have to do this. But I don't know, I think this was a great idea. Think about it this way, adventure games, especially back then, were never designed to be beaten in one sitting. This wasn't in the PC versions, but since those were made for PCs, they had a natural degree of separation from console and arcade games. So having something like this here really helped to establish, well, quite a few things. For one, it helps the average Famicom player know this isn't the fast and snappy action games they bought the console for, which is the whole reason these games were brought over to the console. However, there's nothing like this in Portopia. This is a unique addition to Hokkaido Serial Murders because it supports the design philosophy of this game. This is a world that you must learn can move and change at any time, even during the times you're not present in-game or in person. That's as Hideo Kojima-y as anything Hideo Kojima, inspired by these games, has done himself. Outside of this edition, Hokkaido's Famicom port is structurally identical to Portopia's, which, taking into consideration the innovations from Hokkaido Serial Murders and Karuizawa Yukai Anai, the third Yuji Horii adventure game that I haven't mentioned too much, was specifically designed to prepare people for the planned release of Dragon Quest on the console, which also includes the addition of a first-person dungeon crawler section, something that hasn't been removed in the modern version, for better and for worse. Now, I've actually grown to love first-person dungeon crawlers, so I shouldn't have any issue with this, but I do, because for some reason, this section in the modern version of Hokkaido is slow as balls. I know I've been talking a lot about taking your time and all that stuff, but it makes no sense here. This is urgent. We don't have time to be leisurely walking through a cave, shun. Can't we go any faster? You're not even doing anything to break up the walking here. It's literally all you can do. At least the later section in the epilogue is an actual RPG. But I guess considering that, I do like the fact they did expand on this old edition, and considering the current climate of the game industry, you could argue these original additions to the Famicom version are still needed in the modern version. And to me, that includes the quit puzzle as well. But I guess it's fine it's not here since the physical version comes with the Famicom port. And also, the modern version has its own unique addition that gets people used to adventure game design, in the form of the puzzle pieces. This version hides puzzle pieces on almost every scene in the game. If you finish it, you get to look at the Famicom box art, and that's it. You know, when I was playing, I was kinda hoping this would unlock the Famicom port for the digital versions of the game, but they didn't translate that version, so there wouldn't be much of a point. Also, they made it pretty clear only the physical version would come with the Famicom port, and the physical version is only being sold in Japan, so you shouldn't really expect any bonuses not sold in English storefronts to be in English, and it's not like there aren't other ways of playing the Famicom version anyway. So it's fine. It's fine. That's not even the reason why I wanted to bring this up. Whenever the act of using a point-and-click interface is used in adventure game progression, if an environment doesn't do a good job at particularly conveying something is unique about a space to warrant searching it, it's usually considered pixel hunting. But people just sort of throw that phrase around even at the slightest inconvenience caused by a point-and-click element. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be bad, because when it sucks, it really sucks. When I first played Portopia for the Famicom, I thought it was extremely fucking stupid that there was a drawer I could check and not find something in, just to check the other side of the same drawer you open, look at, and close the exact same way every time to find an item required for progression. It's bullshit. But honestly, I do understand why this was lost in translation, since Portopia wasn't initially designed this way. Remember, this game used to have a text parser. You probably opened this just by typing out open drawer or something along those lines in the original. There wouldn't have been a distinction between one side or the other. Huh. I guess this is a good case for how command input can be better for a game than selection. That doesn't change this, however, and this still pisses me off. And this isn't even about Hokkaido serial murders. What are we doing? Anyway, since Hokkaido serial murders has always been designed with the command menu in mind, you won't find something like this anywhere in the game. There will be times where you do need to use the pointer to look for something, but often it's something that particularly sticks out as a unique element. And with the addition of the puzzle pieces, even if it's just a little side thing, it's still a fun little reward for being extra attentive. It may even further encourage you to get out the pointer and start looking for unique things, just to find something you actually were supposed to find. Maybe something like this will help people understand there is a difference between searching an environment and pixel hunting. Not every instance of this is bad just because you have to be slightly more perceptive of your environment, you freaks. This is all to say, regardless of the version, it is clear to me that Hokkaido serial murders accomplished what Yuji Horii and Login Soft set out to do perfectly. Playing it, you will be able to see the true essence of the adventure games and RPGs it would go on to inspire, and you'll hopefully have fun doing so. If you think you'll be missing anything from playing the modern version, don't worry too much, because this is still an excellent version to play, and with Kiyokazu Arai's signature art style all over the game, you can't even say it's too far of an artistic departure. Also, I haven't mentioned it too much, but the extended story alone makes this the definitive way to play Hokkaido serial murders. I wholeheartedly recommend you play this game yourself in any way you can, because you'll be experiencing one of the most important games of all time. But with all that said, I don't think it would be a bad idea if someone were to translate the Famicom version in English as well. There was a fan project that started up a while back, but they dropped the project once the remake was announced. I think it's important to be able to play more than one version of a game, so I hope they or someone else picks it back up. And hey, while we're at it, I'd love to see translations of the original PC versions of the entire Yuji Horii mystery trilogy. That includes the original Portopia and Karuizai Yukai Anai, which doesn't even have a Famicom version, because it's too fucking sexy. I believe that should also include Tokyo Nampa Street, which is considered one of the very first actual dating sims. And oh yeah, speaking of dating sims, hey Konami! Where the fuck is Tokimeki Memorial? I saw you announce and release a Switch version, and you're just not going to give that to us? And you're going to give us this bullshit instead? What the fuck? And hey, while I'm complaining to companies, hey Nintendo, where the fucking Bloody Mission Bond? You think you can release a whole ass console as a way of distracting you haven't released this game yet? Well, guess what? forgot to talk about the nude scene. But yeah, it's in there. Pretty spicy for a Famicom game, wouldn't you say?